I think it will all come down to one aspect, and that one aspect will ensure that it fails. And I'm sorry for sounding so pessimistic, but that one aspect is city management. Who's in charge of our cities? Who runs our cities?
The most vivid images from last week, at least for many of us, would be of the drowned Silicon Valley of India. Yes, I am talking about Bengaluru, where just a few days of heavy rainfall in the past several days was enough to bring the city to its knees. Visuals of employees, including the CFOs, CEOs of companies, using tractors to get to their office, had flooded social media. Of course, there were many others who were seen getting rescued by these very same tractors. Now, one even saw a number of high-end luxury cars submerged in waters, as you can see in the visuals on your screen. Yes, the rains in Bangalore were excessive, but was the excessive flooding really necessary, or was it avoidable? I am joined by Sukumar Ranganathan, the paper's editor-in-chief, Hindustan Times editor-in-chief. And Sukumar, my first question to you really would be, as one of our columnists who wrote on this topic in the paper wrote, that it takes a special kind of skill to cause flooding, or more appropriately, waterlogging in a city like Bangalore. That seemingly sarcastic comment. Why do you explain to our viewers the reason behind that?
No, I don't think it was sarcastic at all. I think it was a very factual comment based on the fact that Bangalore is one of the it's one of the highest cities in India in terms of altitude, right? It's at an altitude which is higher than Delhi's, definitely higher than Bombay and Chennai, higher than Hyderabad. So it's quite high. And it rests on a ridge line. Sure, there are valleys in between, but it's very difficult to cause flooding in it because these things over years, if you look at the millennia of how landforms have evolved, have their own inherent drainage patterns and doesn't cause flooding of the state of the nature that we saw. So I think the columnist was being factual when he said what he did. I think it's important to acknowledge 2 or 3 things when it comes to floods, right? I know we are talking about Bangalore, or Bengaluru, but it could be any city, right? I mean, it could be because you do remember that a few years ago we had this issue in Gurugram, and when there was rain and there was a jam, and there were stretches of the expressway which were flooded. And the images, if you look at it, were pretty similar to what happened. And then you go back to Chennai,
Yes.
which was before the recent flooding in Bangalore. The last time that you saw so many luxury cars and homes being damaged was in those Chennai floods.
Right.
And I think and Mumbai, of course, keeps having them from time to time. So I think it's a pattern that repeats itself. So I think it does not really make sense to look at it from the specific topography of one city, although there is merit in doing that, but look at the larger issue. And I think larger issue, there are 3 real aspects to it. The first aspect has to do with the climate crisis. What this does is it increases the probability of extreme weather events, including what the Indian Weather Office calls heavy rainfall.
Right.
For instance, in Bangalore this time, the Indian Weather Office started keeping records in 1901. So we have data from 1901, so 122 years. The maximum number of instances of what they call heavy rainfall in Karnataka was seen this year.
Yes.
All right. So, and this probability will only increase. So when scientists speak in terms of extreme weather events happening with greater intensity and higher frequency, this is exactly what they mean. Previously, it would have happened once in 100 years. Could it happen once in 30 years? Probably. Could it happen once in 10 years? Maybe.
Who knows, yeah.
Right? So I think the climate crisis is the first part of it. The second part of it is infrastructure. I think our cities definitely do not have adequate infrastructure when it comes to water evacuation, simply because the stormwater evacuation mechanism in most cities is primitive. And I think this is one area where cities have really not spent too much attention, for the simple reason that I think the incentives are not there. For instance, some people in Bengaluru are still talking about what happened because they're still in hotels.
Yes.
Right? I mean, there are still there are still high-end societies which are residential condos where there are huge issues because of waterlogging. I can assure you that a month from now, no one is going to be talking about it.
True.
Right? So I think local governments have realized that public memory is short, unfortunately. So not really incentive for them to do it. There is a third aspect to it, and the third aspect to it is the more insidious aspect of the kind of nexus that is there between local authorities and developers when it comes to developing real estate. And this is again, people like to believe that it is unique to one city in India, but it is not. It just happens. And now sometimes it happens even the local development authority actually does it in a very transparent and legal way, but it is still an encroachment. So let me give you a couple of examples. You look at the expressway in connecting Delhi to Gurugram.
Right.
One stretch of area which typically gets flooded is what is called the Hero Honda Chowk, right? Which is where cars go underwater and all that. They seem to have improved it, and they've also natural drainage line there going from left to right, but I think the expressway which was needed just cut it off, and I don't think we built an alternative,
yeah.
Because if you look at it, the land on as you drive from Delhi towards Jaipur and the left side is at a slight gradient to the right side, and the right side is where you have the water bodies and the wetlands. Basa is there. You go further down, you find Sultanpur. So all of those are there. And I just think that this was built without paying any attention to natural water drainage. In Chennai, for instance, when we spoke of the floods there, the floodplains of the Adyar River were encroached. And they were encroached by colonies which just came up, buildings that came up. So where does the water go to? What is the water evacuation process?
It's just going to hang there.
Yeah, and I think this is becoming a characteristic of development across Indian cities. So you can't blame one city, it's happening everywhere. But these three reasons are probably what caused these three reasons caused the floods in Bangalore. And I think you can write the same thing every time there is a flood somewhere. We can just say
the names will change, but the script will remain the same.
And the reasons will remain exactly the same.
Right. So you've broadly covered everything, that why the floods were caused, why the waterlogging was caused, and why there was mayhem in Bangalore for several days, and even continuing in some areas today. However, going forward, you've outlined the reasons. The way forward, obviously, you said that political will is lacking because not just politicians, but even the bureaucrats have obviously figured out that public memory is short. Then what is the solution going forward? How do we fix it? Because this is, as you're talking about the climate crisis is upon us. It's not something that's happening in the distant future. It's upon us. And if we don't look at it, look at resolving these things, then today is Bengaluru, yesterday it was Chennai, and day after tomorrow it's going to be another city, and it's just going to continue. How do we resolve it? How can we resolve it at a systemic level?
See, it's a good question, and I can give you a laundry list.
Yes.
But I think it will all come down to one aspect, and that one aspect will ensure that it fails. And I'm sorry for sounding so pessimistic, but that one aspect is city management. Who's in charge of our cities? Who runs our cities? And I think there is a lack of clarity. There are multiple entities controlled by various arms. There is no single point, or there is no person, or there's no person or body whom you can point to and say this person is responsible for ensuring that the city is all right, which is pretty much the Latin American, Western European concept of a mayor, right?
I was just going to come to that. Maybe we need to look at that sort of a system.
But who runs cities? Who is responsible for the cities? And I think there we clearly have not evolved a model which is robust enough, and you can see the results of that. And everything else is manageable, right? Because but at the end of the day, it has to be an entity which handles this, and that's where the rubber meets the road, as they say. So you have to do a lot of you will obviously have to use a lot of science to figure out what the traditional water evacuation patterns are, where the traditional drains or drainage systems existed, what kind of strengthening you need to do. You'll have to do all that, but those are all subsequent steps. I think the preliminary step is to set up one body which is in charge of it. And there is a third aspect to it, right, which I think is the citizen aspect, because I just think that a lot of Bangalore's residents, including their entrepreneurs and the IT industry, sort of are portraying themselves as victims. And in many ways, they were all, like all of us are, were accessories to the crime.
Yeah, that's what the Karnataka revenue minister is going around saying, that you are the ones who are laying the blame at our door, but the stormwater drains are covered by your entities. Now, of course, they can come back and say that these are property developers and we've just rented out.
And there were government arms that gave them permission. So, there is no end to the finger pointing.
Right.
But, every person in Bangalore who buys a house or an apartment block which promises a lake view should ask themselves, what happened to the lake? Or, we are so close to the lake, have parts of it been encroached? I mean, it's a basic question that you need to ask. I think your civic responsibility entails that you need to ask this question. You can't hide behind the fact that it was a developer who did it and you're just buying it, paying your hard-earned money. No one's arguing with that, but surely you have some responsibility. And I just think that, and it's not just Bangalore, I think across cities, many of us have, we no longer look at it, right? I mean, this is a pet peeve of mine. There are food services companies that offer you intercity delivery of food, right? So you can get biryani from Calcutta delivered to your home in Ghaziabad if you want to. Just look at the carbon footprint on that biryani, right? I mean, and these are companies which are run by, I would like to think, smart young people who should actually have some iota of sense, which they don't seem to have, and so it comes across everything, right? I mean, and you're beginning to see the results of that. In Delhi, for instance, or in Gurugram, you don't have power. Condos are built with no real regard to what is happening, and they have 24-hour power backup with diesel generators.
Sure.
You know what it does to the air. So now, sure, the developers are to blame, the government arms that gave them permission are to blame, but your civic sense or your civic responsibility or your civic duty or your interaction with this whole space has to extend beyond being a victim.
Right. So lots of food for thought there for all of you from my editor-in-chief here, because yes, we can blame whoever we want to, but at the end of the day, we also need to take responsibility for our role in not just, and our role can just be about not asking the right questions, or just closing our eyes to something that doesn't affect us at that very moment. But since we're talking about Bangalore, my last question to you, Sukumar, would really be, there was this entire conversation after the flooding started, at least on social media. There was this huge conversation that you should shift the IT hub out of Bangalore, move it to Gurugram or some other place. But you're right, this is going to be a situation everywhere. But is there a case, a legitimate case for reducing some of the pressure on Bangalore as a city in terms of moving out some of the industry from there?
Good question. How are you going to do it? By edict? Are you going to behave the way China does? The unfortunate aspect is there are a few Indian cities which are good for business and they attract people and they attract businesses. You have the entire NCR region, you have Mumbai, you have Pune to some extent, you have Hyderabad, and you have Bangalore. You have no one else. Pretty much. There are people who say that, oh, it's happening here, it's happening in this center, it's happening in Himachal, it's happening in West Bengal, it's happening in other places. You look at the amount of capital that is going into these cities that I just named, and the reason for that is, part of the reason for that is that it's a virtuous cycle. But have we really focused on making second level cities, right? I mean, Coimbatore, for instance, since we are speaking about South India, can it be made into, and I also name Coimbatore because one of the things that Bangalore has going for it is the weather. In fact, it's probably the only thing Bangalore has going for it,
Yes.
Given everything that's been happening. But Coimbatore again has similar salubrious weather. What will it take to make it better than what it is as a destination for IT companies and engineering companies and technology companies? It'll be interesting if governments, see, the thing is, all governments talk a lot about this. Whichever planning agency you have or consulting agency you have, including the Niti Aayog, they all talk a lot about it. But I think at the end of the day, there's very little that's happened. I can't think of, let's say 20 years ago, when I used to work in a magazine, or 22 years, 23 years ago, when I used to work in a magazine, I remember doing a feature about India's next big cities. They still haven't become big, right? I mean, they're still where they are. So we can continue talking about it, but so there's all this talk of relocation will vanish very fast.
All right. Okay. So there it is. The relocation talk will vanish very fast because there are only limited options, and lots of food for thought for our policymakers also. But as Sukumar said, that food for thought has been there for years and decades, but nothing really has moved on the ground. But yes, we need to, something needs to give, given that the climate crisis is really, really upon us now, and Bengaluru floods and the crippling halt that the city came to was just one of the aftermaths, and this might just happen more often, more sooner in other cities across the country. Thank you so much for watching this broadcast. Stay tuned to Hindustan Times for more incisive analysis and latest updates.